I'm not the romantic type. Never have been. But I pay attention, and I try to do right by the people I care about. Linda used to say that about me to her friends. Frank's not flashy, but he always shows up. That was me. Reliable. Predictable. Solid. We've been married 27 years. Some good, some not. Most of it somewhere in the middle. I wouldn't say things were bad between us lately, just flat. Quiet. She went to bed early, I stayed up late. We said less and less, like we were running out of small talk and didn't know how to start the big stuff. But I still loved her. I guess I thought that was enough. Linda used to talk about going to Paris. It was her dream back when we couldn't even afford a night in Chicago. Someday, I want to see the Eiffel Tower lit up at night, she'd say. That was 20 years ago, maybe more. But I remembered. And when her birthday rolled around this year, I figured maybe it was time to give her that dream. Maybe it would help bring something back. Something we'd let fade. So I booked the whole thing, flight, hotel, some kind of river cruise dinner thing she always talked about. She liked the idea of wine and soft music, even though she never drank more than a glass. I used my work bonus and cashed out some airline points. Spent a few nights running numbers and moving money, trying to make it all fit. It wasn't cheap, but I didn't care. She was worth it, or at least I thought she was. I didn't tell her ahead of time. Wanted it to be a surprise. On her birthday morning, I made her coffee like I always did. 1 sugar, splash of cream, and slid the envelope across the table. She looked at it, confused. What's this? Open it. She pulled out the papers and scanned them. Her eyes stopped on the hotel name and the flight number. Frank, what is this? Paris, I said. 5 nights. You leave in 2 weeks. She stared at me like I was joking. Are you serious? I nodded. Happy birthday, Linda. She didn't cry, but she got quiet. Looked back down at the papers. Her hands were shaking, just a little. Then she smiled, wide and bright, more than I'd seen in months. She leaned over and kissed my cheek. Frank, you didn't have to do this. I wanted to, I said. You've been talking about Paris since before we could afford groceries. She laughed. I don't even have a passport. Already handled. It's in the drawer, expedited. She just stared at me like she couldn't believe it. And for a moment, I felt like the old us again. Like I did something right. She talked about the clothes she'd pack, how she'd lose 5 pounds before the trip, how she'd finally buy that red scarf she saw in a catalog last fall. She hadn't sounded that excited about anything in a long time. It made me feel good. Proud, even. She started spending more time on her phone after that. Said she was looking up things to do in Paris. Fashion blogs. Restaurant reviews. I noticed her putting on makeup more often, even when she wasn't going anywhere. She bought new shoes. Got her hair done. At the time, I figured she just wanted to feel good for the trip. Most women do that, right? But there was something else. She was happier, yes, but not toward me. Not with me. It was like the excitement didn't include me at all. Like she was already living some separate version of the story, one where I wasn't in the picture. I brushed it off. Told myself I was being paranoid. Told myself it was stress or age, or maybe she just needed the time away. We hadn't gone anywhere in years. I figured she deserved it. What I didn't figure, what never even crossed my mind, was that someone else might be going with her. She never asked me to come along. Not once. I joked about it, half serious, and she laughed it off. You wouldn't enjoy it, she said. All that walking and standing in lines. You hate that. She wasn't wrong. But still it felt strange. Cold. I let it go. Told myself I was imagining things. Because if I started digging into that feeling, that sharp little gut pinch that said something's off, I might not like what I found. And back then, I still wanted to believe in her. I still wanted to believe in us. The 2 weeks leading up to Linda's trip went by in a blur. At least for her. She was all over the place. Shopping, planning, packing, repacking. Boxes came to the house almost daily. Shoes, luggage, new dresses tagged still on them. Half of it I'd never seen her wear before she left. I remember standing in the hallway, watching her zip up a 3rd suitcase, and thinking, this is a 5-day trip, right? Not a relocation? She smiled more than usual. Laughed more, too. But not with me. Not at me. It was like she had some little secret she was keeping all to herself. I'd ask what she was looking at on her phone, and she'd just say, picturesque stuff? Sometimes she'd flip the screen over when I walked by. Real casual. Like I wouldn't notice. I did. Still, I tried not to overthink it. She was excited. Women get that way about big things like this, especially when it's something they've wanted their whole life. I told myself it was a good sign, that she was happy, and if she came back feeling more like herself, maybe we could pick up some of the pieces we've been stepping over the last few years. One night, 3 days before the flight, we sat on the couch. She was scrolling her phone, legs curled up, glass of wine in hand. I looked at her and said, "You know, if this trip goes well, maybe next year we'll go together." She didn't look up right away. Then she said, "Yeah, maybe." Flat, like it was just a thing to say. That one stuck with me. The night before she left, she was all packed up and pacing the house. Couldn't sit still. She must have checked her bags 4 times. Made sure the passport was where it should be. Checked the boarding pass. Checked the charger. All of it. "I can drive you to the airport," I offered. She waved it off. No, Susan's taking me." She offered. Susan was her best friend. I'd known her for years, though not as well lately. They drifted into their own world after Linda quit her old job a few years ago. Still, it felt a little strange. I would have thought she'd want her husband to take her, but I didn't push. The next morning, she came downstairs dressed like she was stepping onto a runway. Cream-colored coat, sunglasses, makeup done perfectly, and it wasn't even 7 a.m. "You look nice," I said. "Thanks," she said, slipping her phone into her bag without looking at me. "You sure you'll be okay here?" "Of course. It's just a few days." She nodded. Then she leaned in, kissed my cheek, and said, "Don't forget to water the plants." That was it. I stood at the window and watched her get in Susan's car. She didn't look back, just drove off, already in that other world. That night, the house was so quiet it felt hollow. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee and stared at my phone, half expecting a message from her. Something like, "I made it," or "Miss you already." Nothing. By the time I went to bed, I checked her location on the Find My app. She had landed. The little blue dot was somewhere in central Paris. Hotel District. The next few days were odd. She sent a couple photos. The Eiffel Tower. Some fancy breakfast with berries on top. On the cafe table with a glass of wine and half a croissant. No selfies. None of her smiling in front of landmarks. That was the first thing I noticed. I texted her, "Looks beautiful. Hope you're enjoying it." She replied 2 hours later, "Yeah, it's amazing. Just soaking it all in." That was it. No yards. No miss you. No wish you were here. I kept telling myself not to read into it. Maybe she just needed space. Maybe she was really trying to reset, to breathe a little. But deep down, I felt something else. Something colder. It was in the way she didn't ask about me. Didn't ask how my day was going. Didn't ask if I ate, or how work was, or if I got the lawnmower working like I said I would. Nothing. It wasn't just distance. It was disconnection. I didn't know it then, but Linda wasn't just happy to be going. She was happy to be gone. The first couple of days without Linda weren't bad. If I'm being honest, part of it was even peaceful. No noise. No tiptoeing around each other. No pretending everything was fine when it wasn't. I got up when I wanted. Made my own coffee the way I liked it. Strong, black, no cream. I made eggs and toast, ate them at the table in silence, then took the paper outside like I used to before everything in our lives got complicated and quiet at the same time. I kept myself busy, cleaned out the garage, reorganized the tools, changed the oil in the car. I even went through some old boxes in the basement, wedding pictures, trip photos, birthday cards we'd written to each other over the years. Back when we used to mean the things we wrote. There was one photo that stopped me cold. It was from our 10th anniversary. We were standing by the lake, her head on my shoulder, smiling like she didn't have a care in the world. I remember that trip clearly. She'd surprised me with a cabin rental. We grilled steaks, drank wine on the porch, and laughed until midnight. It was simple, easy, happy. I sat on the floor for a long time holding that picture. I don't know why. Maybe I was trying to feel something again, that old version of her, of us. But the truth is, that woman in the photo wasn't the same one who got on that plane a few days ago. I just hadn't figured out how far gone she was yet. Later that night, I poured a glass of whiskey and sat in the living room. The silence was thick. I turned on the TV, flipped through channels, but nothing held my attention. I finally gave up and just sat there, watching the wall, thinking. I thought about how we'd ended up like this. We used to talk. We used to laugh. But somewhere along the way, things turned into schedules, routines, and then silence. No big fight. No storm. Just a slow fade into something cold and quiet. I texted her before I went to bed. Hope you're having a good time. Let me know if you need anything. She didn't respond. I figured maybe it was the time difference. Maybe she was asleep. Or busy. The next morning, I checked my phone first thing. Still nothing. No missed calls. No texts. I made coffee, sat at the table, and looked around the kitchen like it belonged to someone else. Her mug was still in the dish rack. The seat she always sat in still pulled out a little, like she'd be back in a second. But she wasn't. I looked up at the wall where we used to hang holiday cards from friends. Now, just a bare patch where the paint had faded slightly, like a shadow of what used to be there. I spent the rest of the day trying to keep my mind off things. Mowed the lawn, cleaned the gutters, took a long walk around the block. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't just that she hadn't called. It was the way she hadn't really talked to me in weeks, maybe months. Her voice, when she did speak, was always polite. Flat, like I was a coworker, not a husband. I thought back to all the times I told myself she was just tired, or stressed, or distracted. But deep down, I knew better. I just didn't want to say it out loud. That night, I warmed up some leftovers, ate in front of the TV, and stared at her empty chair. I caught myself listening for her footsteps upstairs, like part of me still expected her to be there, even though I knew she wasn't. That's when it hit me. It wasn't the loneliness that hurt. It was the emptiness. Loneliness still leaves a little hope, a little room to believe maybe things will get better. Emptiness? That's just absence, the kind that doesn't come back. I checked her location again before bed. She was still in Paris. Same hotel, same blued, but somehow she felt further away than ever. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only one waiting, that maybe she didn't plan on coming back the same way she left. Or worse, maybe she didn't plan on coming back at all. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I got the first real gut punch. I was out in the garage, just tightening up some loose cabinet doors, trying to keep busy. The radio was playing low, and my phone buzzed on the workbench. I wiped my hands on a rag and picked it up. It was my bank. Not a scam call, a real person. A woman named Renee. Said she was calling to verify some recent activity on my credit card. Mr. Taylor, she said, polite and professional. We noticed several high-dollar international charges in the last 48 hours. Just checking to make sure they're legitimate. I straightened up. Go on. She read them off. A boutique clothing store, 2 restaurants, a perfume shop, and a high-end spa. All in Paris. Now, I knew Linda had the card. I'd given it to her for the trip. I told her to enjoy herself. That wasn't the issue. But something about the way Renee said the amounts like she was tiptoeing made my chest tighten. Those are hers, I said. My wife's on a trip. Okay, good, she said. Just wanted to make sure. One more thing. Do you want me to authorize the additional cardholder request that came through this morning? I blinked. What? She hesitated. There was an online request to add a second cardholder to the account. It was flagged, since it came from a foreign IP address. I felt like the air had gone out of the garage. No, I said flatly. Deny it, and freeze the card. I'll handle it from here. Of course, Mr. Taylor. I hung up without saying goodbye. I just stood there for a few seconds, staring at nothing, the phone still in my hand. My heart wasn't racing. It was something worse. That still, cold anger that settles in your gut and tells you this isn't just a mistake. That night, I didn't sleep. I try not to think the worst. Maybe she clicked something by accident. Maybe it was some app or an autofill or, hell, I don't know. But deep down, I knew better. I checked her Instagram. Nothing new posted since the first couple of photos. The wine glass. The cafe. Still no selfies. Still no photos of her face. No Eiffel Tower at night. No smile with the city in the background. I check her location again. Still the same hotel. I stare at that blue duck for a long time, just sitting in the dark, listening to the hum of the fridge and the occasional tick of the thermostat. Something had shifted. I could feel it in my bones. She wasn't just busy or distracted. She was avoiding me. I texted her again. Let me know if everything's okay. No response. 12 hours passed. Nothing. I tried to think about what else could explain it. Maybe her phone died. Maybe she lost her charger. Maybe the time change had her off schedule. Maybe. Or maybe she was just choosing not to answer. And that's when I opened my laptop and went to the travel site I'd used to book her trip. I logged into the account, pulled up the reservation. One thing stuck out right away. The hotel booking had been changed the day after she arrived. Upgraded. 2 adults, not 1. I stared at the screen, jaw tight, fingers frozen on the mouse. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to think about what that meant. But I wasn't an idiot. It was right there in front of me. I opened the email confirmation. Sure enough, it listed 2 guests. Different room type. A king bed. Not a single line about me. I stood up and walked out to the back porch. The night air was cool, but I didn't feel it. I just stood there, staring into the yard like it might offer some kind of answer. But there wasn't one. Not yet. All I had was silence. An empty house. And a wife who wasn't picking up the phone, because maybe she wasn't alone to begin with. Maybe she never planned to be. I didn't know what I was hoping to find, but I couldn't sit still. My thoughts were louder than the TV, louder than the quiet house, louder than reason. The next morning, I made coffee and stared at my phone like it owed me answers. Linda still hadn't replied. 3 days, nothing but silence. The kind that says everything without a word. I could have called her again, but something stopped me. Pride, maybe. Or maybe I didn't want to hear her voice lie to me. I was tired of guessing, tired of giving her the benefit of the doubt. So I called Susan. She'd been her best friend since college. They talked every week, sometimes every day, and I figured if Linda wasn't talking to me, she'd be talking to her. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Hey, Frank, Susan said. Everything okay? I paused. That's why I was calling to find out. A second of silence. I haven't heard from Linda in a few days, I said. She left Sunday. Sent a couple pictures. Nothing since. I was wondering if she's texted you. Susan hesitated. Yeah, we talked. She texted me the other night. I knew right then, just from her tone, that something was off. She doing okay? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Another pause. Yeah, she said she's having fun. It's beautiful there. Did she say anything else? Susan exhaled. Frank, I don't want to get in the middle of anything. I felt the bottom drop out of my stomach. You're already in it, I said. I just want to know the truth. She was quiet for a second longer, then her voice dropped. Look, I wasn't supposed to say anything, but she's not alone. There it was. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I just stood there, staring at the kitchen counter while her words sank in. Frank, I'm sorry, Susan added quickly. I thought you knew. I figure she told you. She didn't. I shouldn't have said anything. No. I cut in my voice flat. I'm glad you did. I didn't mean to. Thanks, Susan. That's all I needed. I hung up before she could say anything else. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I just wanted quiet. I set the phone down, walked out to the porch, and sat on the top step. My coffee had gone cold, but I didn't care. I just stared out at the yard and tried to make sense of it all. So that was it. She was with someone else. While I was home, mowing the lawn and sorting through old photos, she was halfway across the world, living out some fantasy with a man I didn't even know existed. And I paid for it. I paid for the plane ticket, the hotel, the dinner cruise, all of it. The sick part? I did it because I loved her, because I thought she just needed a break, because I believed in what we used to have, and maybe, stupid as it sounds now, I thought we could get it back. Turns out, I wasn't giving her freedom. I was giving her a runway. She didn't hesitate, didn't blink, just took what I gave her and used it to walk right out of my life. The next few hours were a blur. I couldn't sit still, couldn't think straight. Every corner of the house felt smaller, quieter, meaner, and I kept seeing her face. Not the version in Paris, not the woman laughing in cafes. The one from a week ago, smiling as she zipped up her suitcase, thanking me for the trip, kissing my cheek like everything was fine. Like she didn't already have her heart set on someone else. That was the part that hurt the most. She didn't even hesitate. No vite, no pause, no second thoughts. She just left, and she didn't look back. After I hung up with Susan, I sat still for a long time. I wasn't mad, not yet. I was something colder than that. The kind of still where everything inside goes quiet because the noise is done, the guessing, the hoping, the doubting. That part's over. Now it's just clarity. And clarity hurts like hell. I walked into the kitchen and opened the drawer where we kept old paperwork. Travel receipts, booking emails, passwords. Linda never deleted anything. She printed everything out just in case. I used to tease her about it. I found a printed itinerary I gave her. It was the version I booked myself. Flight, hotel, some prepaid tours and reservations I'd lined up to make it easier for her. Then I went back to my laptop, logged into the travel site again, and started digging deeper. I pulled up the reservation history. It showed the original booking dated 3 weeks ago, the one I'd made. Then I saw an update dated just a day after she arrived in Paris. Hotel change. Not just an upgrade, a complete modification. Different room type. 2 guests. I clicked through the confirmation. Right there, under the guest info, Linda Taylor and Edward J. Pierce. That name hit me like a steel bat to the ribs. Edward. It Pievche. I didn't know him personally, but I knew the name. I'd seen it on her phone once, months ago. She said he was a client. He ran some kind of photography business, or something like that. I never pressed. Why would I? I trusted her. I guess that's on me. I searched his name online. Took 2 minutes to find him. Website, Instagram, even a business listing. Looked like the kind of guy who wears scarves indoors and writes long captions about capturing the soul. In half his pictures, he was holding a wine glass. The kind of guy who probably thought I was a boring old relic of a man. He had no idea what kind of man I really am. I sat back, closed the laptop, and stared at the wall. I'd been played. She'd used me to bankroll their little getaway. While I was sitting here feeling guilty that maybe I drifted too far, maybe I hadn't tried hard enough, maybe I let her get bored, she was in Europe, laughing in someone else's bed. And she didn't just do it behind my back. She used my wallet to do it. Every bite of steak, every hotel pillow, every bottle of wine, and rooftop view. That was on my dime. Every single one. I wasn't just cheated on. I was sponsored. That's when something clicked inside me. Like a gear that had been jammed, finally loosened. I stood up, grabbed my coat, and drove to my lawyer's office. Russell's been my attorney for years. Helped with real estate stuff, a few contracts, nothing serious until now. I walked in unannounced, and his secretary didn't even blink. She waved me in. Russell looked up from his desk. "Frank, I need to talk," I said, shutting the door behind me. "About Linda." He sat up straighter. "That bad?" I nodded. "It's worse." I laid it all out for him. The trip, the hotel changes, the second name on the reservation, the silence. His face didn't change much. He'd seen this before. Probably too many times. "You want to file now?" he asked. "Not yet," I said. "But I want everything ready. I want to protect the house, the accounts, the retirement. Everything." He nodded. "Understood. You'll need to start separating joint assets." Quietly. "I already froze one credit card," I said. "Can I move half the savings?" "Move yours, not hers. And keep records. Every cent." I sat there for the next hour, signing paperwork, taking notes, listening to advice I never thought I'd need. When I left, the sky was already getting dark. I didn't feel relief. I didn't feel vengeance. I felt like a man waking up after a long, deep sleep, only to find the house around him was on fire. And now I was walking out the front door, calmly, while the flames took everything she thought would still be waiting when she got back. I didn't sleep much that night. Too many thoughts, too much energy burning through me. But it wasn't panic, not even heartbreak. It was focus, the kind you get when everything clicks and you stop asking why and start asking what now. By morning, I had a plan. The first thing I did was go to the bank. Sat down with a manager I've known for years, a guy named Darren. Didn't sugarcoat anything. I told him I needed to separate everything tied to Linda. Checking, savings, investments, whatever had her name on it needed to be frozen, reallocated, or moved under my sole control where legally possible. I expected a lecture, or at least a raised eyebrow. Instead, he just nodded and said, "I'll walk you through it." That was step one. Next, I went home and dug into every file cabinet, every drawer, every account login we'd ever shared. I printed statements, took screenshots, backed up documents. It took hours. By the end of it, my office looked like a war room. Papers everywhere, marked up, sorted into piles. I labeled one folder hers and another mine. Then I called Russell again. "About everything," I told him. "Let's talk real divorce now." Quietly. He asked if I wanted to notify her yet. "No," I said. "Not until she lands. I want her to come home and see what she did." He didn't argue. We set things in motion: temporary financial protections, asset freezes, early filings, pre-filled paperwork ready for delivery the moment I gave the green light. By that evening, I felt like a new man. Not because I was free, not yet, but because I'd stopped sitting still. That night, I sat at our kitchen table, the one we picked out at that furniture store off Route 62, where she couldn't decide between maple or cherry. I looked across at her empty seat and pictured her sitting there, swirling a glass of wine, telling me how good Paris was for her soul. Then I pulled out a pen and wrote her a letter. Not long, not dramatic, just plain truth. Linda, I hope Paris was everything you wanted. While you were gone, I found out the rest. I saw the hotel change. I saw his name. I didn't need any more proof. You made your choice, and now I've made mine. The accounts are closed. The house is protected. The lawyer's on standby. You don't owe me an explanation. I don't need one. You are free. But don't expect to come home to the life you left behind. That version of us doesn't exist anymore. Frank. I folded the letter and left it on the dresser in our bedroom. Not dramatic, not hidden. Right where she'd see it when she opened her suitcase. Thought of one more thing. I packed up the photos. All of them. Framed wedding shots, vacation pictures, family portraits we hadn't updated in years. I didn't throw them away. Just put them in a box, taped it shut, and carried it to the garage. I didn't need reminders. Not anymore. I went to bed around midnight. The bed felt too big. The sheets too cold. But for the first time in a long while, I wasn't laying there wondering how to fix something broken. I was just done. And there's a strange kind of peace that comes with that. Like finishing the last page of a long, painful book and knowing you'll never have to read it again. I didn't know what would happen when she got back. Didn't care either. She could beg. She could cry. She could lie. But none of it would change what I'd already done. And I knew one thing for sure. She'd left for Paris with a husband and a home. She'd come back to neither. She landed 2 days later. I knew because I checked her flight, not because she told me. I sat at the kitchen table that morning, sipping coffee, watching the clock. I wasn't nervous, wasn't anxious, just still, focused, like waiting for a storm you already boarded the windows for. She came through the door around 9:20 a.m. I didn't jump up or go to greet her. I stayed seated, let her walk in, heels tapping on the tile, bags in hand, looking like she expected to pick right up where she left off. "Hey," she said, voice light. "I'm home." I looked up. "Yeah, I figured." She blinked, caught off guard by my tone. "You didn't text me." "No," I said, setting my mug down. Didn't see the point. She narrowed her eyes a little, like she was trying to read the mood. "You okay?" "Depends," I said. Yeah, she said, her smile faltering. "It was a great trip. Beautiful city. We should go together someday." That did it. I stood slowly, pushed the chair back, and nodded toward the hallway. "You should go unpack." She tilted her head. "Why? What's going on?" "Check the dresser," I said. "Top drawer." She stared at me another second, then walked past. I didn't follow, just stood in the kitchen with my arms crossed, listening. It was quiet at first. Then I heard the pause, the paper unfolding, a long silence. Then, "Frank," her voice cracked. "What is this?" "You tell me," I said, stepping into the doorway. She held the letter in both hands like it might catch fire. "I don't understand. What is this supposed to mean?" "You made your decision in Paris," I said calmly. "I just finished it for you." Her face drained. Frank, you think something happened?" "I don't think anything," I said. "I know." She took a breath, started to speak, then stopped. Looked away. "His name was on the hotel reservation," I added. "Don't bother lying." Her hands dropped to her sides. "Frank, I can explain." "No," I cut her off. "You can't. You were supposed to go find peace, clear your head. But you weren't clearing anything. You were starting over. Without me." Tears welled up in her eyes. "I didn't mean for it to happen like that." "But it did," I said. "And now it's done." I was confused. "No," I said, voice steady. "You were deciding." She stepped forward like she might touch me, but I didn't move. She stopped. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. Too late. She looked around the room like it might help her say something smarter, something that could rewind time. But there wasn't a word on earth that could fix what she'd done. I let the silence hang. Then I added, "The accounts are separated. The lawyer's on standby. All I need is your signature." "Frank, you don't owe me anything," I said. "You already paid in full." She covered her mouth with her hand. I could see the realization sink in, that she wasn't coming back to a husband who'd wait or cry or fight for her. She was coming back to a man who saw her for what she was, and he wasn't going to lift a finger to stop her from walking right out again. The silence was heavy. She turned her head, looked down at the letter, then back up at me. "What do I do now?" she asked. "That's not my problem anymore." I left her standing there in the hallway. I walked back to the kitchen, sat down at the same table, and finished my coffee. And I swear, it tasted better than it had in years. It's been 3 weeks since Linda walked back through that door, and I haven't seen her since the day she signed the papers. She left quietly, which surprised me. No screaming, no throwing blame around. Just packed a small bag, slid the manila envelope across the table, and said, "I never thought it would end like this." I didn't answer. What was there to say? She chose her ending the day she stepped off that plane with someone else's name on her reservation. Since then, the house has been quiet again. But this time it doesn't feel empty. It feels clean, like something toxic finally aired out. I've been sleeping better, eating regular, even started going on evening walks, the kind we always said we'd take, but never did. The lawyer filed everything. Fast-tracked. No contest. Turns out, when someone gets caught that clearly, they don't have much room to argue. Everything stayed with me. The house, the car, the savings. She didn't fight it. Maybe because she couldn't. Maybe because she knew she didn't deserve it. Word got around, of course. Small towns talk. People at the hardware store, the bank, even church. They don't say much, but you can see it in their eyes. Though I heard what happened, look. I don't explain. I don't need to. It's not their story to carry. Susan called once. Left a message. Said she felt awful. Wished she could have warned me. I didn't call back. Nothing against her. I just didn't want to talk about it anymore. Then, last night, Linda texted. "I know you won't answer. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. I was stupid. I messed up everything. He's not who I thought he was. He left a week after we got back. Said he didn't sign up for real life. I didn't think you'd ever walk away. I thought you'd wait for me." I stared at that message for a long time. There was a time I would have cried reading something like that. A time I would have rushed to fix it, to say we could start over. But that man is gone. She didn't lose me because of Ed Pierce. She didn't lose me because of Paris. She lost me the second she decided she could have both, the comfort of my loyalty and the thrill of someone else behind my back. She thought I'd stay planted like I always had. Steady, predictable, safe. But she underestimated what happens when a steady man finally decides he's done being taken for granted. I didn't reply. She chose Paris. She just didn't know the cost. I went out on the porch after that, leaned back in the chair with a beer, and watched the sun dip behind the trees. The same trees I trimmed every fall. The same yard I mowed. The same driveway I shoveled every winter. It's still my life. Only now it's mine again. The hard part? It's not anger I feel. It's pity. Not for myself, for her. Because she traded everything steady for a short thrill that didn't even last the season. She walked away from a man who would have done anything for her, and learned too late that some roads don't circle back. She gave up love for a lie. And in the end, she didn't just lose me. She lost her way home.